Here's an interview with some of the founders of Black Lives Matter UK, and we're going to dissect the shit out of it with the scalpel of truth, and stitch it back together with some facts and figures. Let's do that.
Black Lives Matter. It's a movement that swept the United States, confronting racism, police brutality, deaths, of course, in police custody. But now it's coming here to Britain, and it's planning protests all over the country and actions in the coming weeks and the coming months. So I'm going to speak to two of the key activists behind this movement here in Britain. One, Marcia Rigg, who lost her own brother in police custody here in Brixton, not far from where I'm standing right now, and Wael Kassim. And I'm going to talk to them about why now? What is Black Lives Matter seeking to achieve? What is racism in modern Britain? What does it mean? And can we ever get rid of it? So Black Lives Matter is now being founded here in Britain. The instant response, which, I've been trolled about myself, as I'm sure you all have, about Black Lives Matter. Why do we need it in Britain? This is an American problem.
In the UK, a person dies in police custody every 6 days. Since 1990 at least, we've had 0 convictions of police officers. There's this big movement in the United States, but they have seen police officers being prosecuted, whereas our justice system seems adamant not to kind of give people like Marcia and other families a sense of justice when police officers are caught up in having been involved in killing someone.
No, I totally agree with you there. There should be more investigation done into how people are killed in police custody. I'm with you so far.
When I tweet about this, I guarantee you, the first few tweets, they will say, all lives matter. That will be the response. What's the response to those people?
All lives do matter, but we wouldn't have to have a campaign to say that Black Lives Matter if that was the material fact. 1,563 people who have died in police custody since 1990. A huge proportion of those are black deaths in custody and black and minority ethnic deaths in custody.
No, absolutely not. Let's check out the actual numbers, shall we, please? Thank you. Whites are about 85% of the total population. 15% are black and ethnic, and about 3% are just black. When we look at these figures by inquest of the number killed by police, you see the 1,572 figure that Thingamajig mentioned. That's the total number. Yet only 157 of those 1,572, which any idiot can see that's 10%, are black and ethnic minorities that are killed by police. Black and ethnic minorities are underrepresented when it comes to death by police.
You're twice overrepresented within the figures if you are a non-white person.
No, you're not. It's not true.
All lives should matter, but in order to get to a position where all lives matter, we have to make sure that Black lives matter too.
This is a very kind of simple, naive question, but I think it's an important question. A lot of people watching this will think to themselves they know what racism is. If asked, they will come up with their own definition. But how would you define racism?
It's something that's been made up. We were not born racist. People are discriminated against because of the colour of their skin. That's what racism is, where black people are being stopped and searched disproportionately from their white counterparts.
Yeah, the figures from this graph show that black people are more likely to be stopped by police. And it's because they're more likely to live in high crime areas. The Telegraph did a Freedom of Information request back in 2010, and what it revealed was very interesting. Check this out. The official figures which examine the ethnicity of those accused of violent offences in London suggest the majority of men held responsible by police for gun crimes, robberies and street crimes are black. Black men are also disproportionately the victims of violent crime in the capital. The statistics released by the Metropolitan Police permit an informed debate on a sensitive subject for the first time. They show that among those proceeded against for street crimes, 54% were black, for robbery 59%, for gun crimes 67%. Street crimes include muggings, assault and intent to rob and snatch property. Just over 12% of London's 7.5 million population is black, including those of mixed black and white parentage, while 69% is white, according to the Office of National Statistics. On sex offences, black men made up 32% of male suspects proceeded against, and white men 49%. The statistics also suggest that black women are responsible for a disproportionate amount of violent crime committed by females. So the police obviously know that there's a higher crime rate amongst blacks, so they're not stopping them because they're of their race per se, but because they're the group more likely to be committing crime in the inner city, and who fit the description of who the police are more likely to be looking for.
Racism isn't only a prejudice that people kind of have in their minds, it's also kind of a history and a structure that mean that we see these inequalities. It's a history that's borne out in this country through our involvement in the Atlantic slave trade and colonialism across much of the globe. That's the kind of place where racism is born. We see its legacy kind of taking root in our society today.
So you're saying that people are racist today because of the bad practices of people a few generations ago, and that's where racism was born? Where's the evidence for that? I mean, are you saying racism didn't exist during the Muslim slave trade? Or in some periods in the Egyptian Empire?
I think one of the things that people don't perhaps often get about racism, that you can have a statistic which is absolutely true, that you're 7 times more likely to be stopped and searched if you're a black person in this country.
Well, that's because they commit more crimes in high crime areas like the inner city. Robberies, violent crime, street crime. And only 12% of the inner population are black. And there's also a lot more police there because of the high crime.
We also have to appreciate the fact that white people often can go through the world without even thinking that they would be stopped and searched. It might not figure in your life, and I mean, of course, white people are stopped and searched as well, but it's entirely possible that it won't figure in your life, whereas that's just simply not true if you're a black person, especially a young black man, when it comes to something like stop and search.
Well, that's because whites are 85% of population and mostly live in low crime areas. If you were a young white lad knocking about the streets like I was, I and my mates were regularly stopped by police and asked questions, and I didn't grow up in a particularly high crime area.
Someone like you, Owen, obviously can go through life without necessarily being stopped and searched. I don't know whether you have, but...
Owen, you wasn't born or knocked about with your mates in a high crime area. So stop nodding your stupid head as though he's made an amazing point. He hasn't.
Someone like myself has been stopped and searched nearing 30 times over my very short lifetime.
Fuck off. You are so not the victim of anything. Show me one society other than Western culture where you can openly be a gay black man.
And of course that's kind of wrapped up with class and where you're born as well, but that's what race is too. It's a classed thing. You're much more likely to be in communities that are heavily policed and heavily subject to things like stop and search if you're black.
Yes, a class thing. Those areas are poorer and are heavily policed because of the high crime rate. And your automatic response is racism!
Young school children, like at the age of 7 or 8, which I've met, are scared and concerned because they are black. And I've been told personally by a young black child of 7 or 8 years old that they're scared of the police because they're scared that as a young black man, when they grow up and become a teacher, that they could actually be killed by the police.
Well, who's telling him that? Other black people who haven't got their facts right, maybe?
And so it's ingrained in them. They've seen their brothers, they've seen their uncles, they've seen their fathers being disproportionately stopped.
But not disproportionately killed by police, because that's very rare. So where would he get the idea from that he might be killed by police? It's obviously a narrative that's going around the black community. A false narrative that has corrupted that little boy's judgment.
There's an ongoing relationship between the police and the black community, which is far from healthy.
What is interesting is that 2/3 of black people now grow up in a one-parent family, usually with no father figure. That might explain the high crime rate, because empathy, ethics, social skills usually come from the father figure. There's been a lot of science been done on this. So if Black Lives mattered to Black Lives Matter, they'd focus on the black community and try and figure out what's gone wrong with relationships and family values. And they'd certainly look at the state and the welfare system, because the government has replaced the father as provider and has taken away the incentive for women to choose a husband wisely and keep a providing husband, and has taken away the incentive to go out and get skills to add value to their labour and raise the family out of poverty.
The war on drugs collides very much with racism, doesn't it? So it's not just that black people are far more likely to be stopped and searched, even though government statistics show they're significantly less likely to take drugs themselves, but also, if found with possession of drugs, far more likely to be charged. Mm-hmm. And also incarceration, for example.
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the things that, if we compare with the United States, we actually find that in terms of our population size, we incarcerate far more black men in our prisons than the United States. And we think of the United States as this racist prison industrial complex, which is absolutely true.
No, not true. Blacks commit far more crime in the US. Here's Milo Yiannopoulos with some figures.
FBI statistics on murder lay bare the real threat to black lives in America, and that is other blacks. Black men are about 6.5% of the US population, but they commit 52% of all murders. That has dipped to about 40% in recent years. Black men overwhelmingly murder other black people, and white people overwhelmingly murder other white people. So just like abuse and harassment on the internet, this isn't really a racial issue, like that isn't really a gendered issue. Looking at overall violent crime, blacks are 27% more likely to attack whites than vice versa, and 8 times more likely to attack Hispanics. This is the shocking number I hope you take away from my visit. 90% of blacks that die of murder die at the hands of other black people, and that's from the FBI homicide report, 90%. We're not here to talk about why this happens, why 74% of black children are raised without fathers per Health and Human Services, and why the government seems intent on continuing a cycle of destruction within the black community. My message is simple. Black lives don't matter to Black Lives Matter. If they did, they'd be confronting these issues instead of ignoring them completely.
But we're facing the same problems with our criminal justice system here, wherein you're much more likely to be stopped, you're much more likely to be arrested and then charged, and then once you get in front of the courts, you're much more likely to be convicted and given a harsher sentence.
Here's a clip of YouTuber One True Lib breaking down the numbers for you.
Black people commit disproportionate amounts of crime to the population that they're in. Did you know that black people make up 3% of the population, black, African, Caribbean, and black British? But according to the statistics, from 2010 to 2014, people convicted, we will just use 2014, okay? 20,750 black people were convicted. Now I'm removing the not stated or unknown from the race, so I'm going to use the total known figure. 20,750 divided by 244,850 times 100 is 8.47. That's the percentage of black people who've been convicted for a crime. So 3% of the population is committing 8.47% of its crime. That's nearly 3 times the rate. Oh, do you want me to talk about white people? Let's do it then. 201,474 divided by 244,850 times 100, 82.28%. Yet white people make up 87% of the population. And the conviction rate for indictable offences in 2014 had white people at the highest rate. So how the fuck are you being treated unfairly?
And given a harsher sentence, meaning that our prisons are full of especially black and Asian men and women.
But there's more crime committed by blacks in the inner city, especially in high crime areas. So you are going to find that figure.
So Black Lives Matter here in Britain, what is its aims in the coming weeks, months? What's it seeking to achieve?
After Trayvon Martin died and the hashtag Black Lives Matter came about, I quickly realised that not much people were aware of the deaths that were happening here. We went to the United States last year to meet the Black Lives Matter co-founders and to meet other families that have suffered the same events like myself and other families. And what we found was that the deaths were almost identical. The only difference was that obviously there's more deaths happening in America than there are in Britain. But in essence, the issue of disproportionality, the issue of accountability, the issue of conspiracy, the issue of young black men with mental health was identical to what was happening here.
Yes, and the rates of disproportionality with crime are roughly the same too.
And so therefore that cannot be a coincidence. The issue is racism.
No, it's not. Wrong again. Next.
We want people to go away and organise in their local areas. We face racism every single day.
So do we. You're doing it right now by claiming black people are unfairly treated by white people when they aren't. That's racist.
On the streets of Britain, whether that's street racism or state racism, we want people to go away and address the inequalities, the stop and search, the housing, all of these things that's happening in their communities.
There are more ethnic minorities homeless because of uncontrolled mass immigration and the lack of accommodation and jobs. Don't blame racism when the British people have been very welcoming to other races.
That absolutely leads up to the problem of black people being killed in state custody. These things are in an entire continuum with one another, so we need to be dealing with black deaths, but also looking at black life and making black life better in the United Kingdom.
Theresa May is now investigating racism within our judicial system, so isn't that a welcome thing? Is that a positive thing? Are you optimistic? Are you hopeful?
I absolutely welcome it, that she's looking at these issues.
And if Theresa May does do a proper investigation, she'll find out that there is no racism in the criminal justice system. If I can do it, she can.
But I have to look at it with caution. My family and the family of Shaney Lewis, alongside the Charity Inquest and our legal team, met with Theresa May last year to talk about the issues of deaths in police custody. But it's the way that the families are treated. We're left as victims indefinitely, where we're not on equal footing when there's a death, not just black people, but white people also.
Not just with blacks, but with whites as well. I'm glad you've admitted that, thank you.
In terms of working with the IPCC and the long drawn-out investigations, in the difficulty in obtaining the disclosure of the evidence and the issue of legal aid. And she did listen to us, and she sent her officials into the IPCC's offices to look at the way that they investigate such deaths.
That's the only valuable thing you've said so far. There does need to be an investigation into the IPCC and how it investigates police killings. I'm totally with you on that one.
Do you think one day we will build a society where racism has been driven completely away?
I'm not sure if racism will ever be eradicated by the powers that be, but I hope I can see it in my lifetime. I don't know if I'm going to ever see that.
Almost certainly won't come from the powers that be, and it can't be a top-down operation, but racism had a beginning. It had a beginning in Western Enlightenment thought, philosophers like Immanuel Kant kind of producing these great taxonomies of races across the world and embedding this within how we think. So there's a huge process of having to undo all of that.
Oh, come on. So racism didn't exist during the Muslim slave trade, which was way more brutal to blacks than the Atlantic slave trade. That wasn't racism. What about the Egyptian Empire? And Babylon enslaving the Israelites? I think you'll find it existed as far back as like hunter-gatherer societies.
So we need great philosophers, great cultural leaders, great political leaders to begin to undo how racism is embedded in our society. But I think if it's got a beginning, it definitely can have an end. That's what Black Lives Matter is working towards. I think a big part of Black Lives Matter is thinking about black futures.
The Western world is the least racist it's ever been. People of all races do quite well in the Western world. Asians do better than whites and blacks. There are less of them in prison and they have a higher IQ on average. Is the Chinese community being unfairly treated by the criminal justice system? Or is it just blacks that whites are racist to?
Racism can have an end. We've got to make that end a reality.
The chains will be broken one day.
Some of you are probably thinking, Black Lives Matter, it's an American thing. We don't need it here in Britain, it's a totally different context. Well, I hope by listening to them, I hope at least we can all understand that racism is very much a problem, a scourge here in British society.
A scourge? People like you are a fucking scourge on British society, Owen Jones.
And injustice is never overcome by just sitting around and being polite. People need to take action against it.
People are taking action against you, social justice warriors, who blame all your problems on other people because it's much easier to do that than face the problems yourself.
So I hope in the coming weeks, the coming months, many of you will be supportive of what Black Lives Matter is trying to do, and we can unite all of us to overcome racism. And I want to hear your thoughts though. Please do leave your comments about what you've seen in terms of how we're going to take on racism, how we're going to overcome it, maybe your own experiences of racism. As ever, subscribe. I'll see you next time.
This argument that blacks are unfairly treated by whites is absolute horse shit. And it's people like these and the founders of Black Lives Matter UK that are causing racial tensions because of their unwillingness to try and figure these things out. Or it's much more comforting for them to believe they're being discriminated against, instead of admitting the facts and taking some responsibility for the black community. It's a shame, a real shame. Let's get some historical context on this too, because most black people in Europe came here voluntarily after World War II. Yes, Britain was involved in the Atlantic slave trade, an awful practice, and there was a bit of a to-do in the 17th and 18th century with black servants in the British Empire, who were treated quite well actually, compared to slave-owning societies. A lot of British middle and working class people hated slavery and fought back the British ruling class over and over again and created the best system of law the world had ever seen. Though slavery was allowed in some British colonies, usually Irish slaves, there was laws created that anyone who stepped foot on the shores automatically became a free man. I mean, this was revolutionary. Britain didn't have chattel slavery like America did. That's why there are more blacks in the US. Chattel slavery was made illegal as far back as Magna Carta. Britain was the first to put an end to slavery in its own culture, and then went on to put an end to slavery globally, admittedly through immense pressure and warfare. But slavery was outlawed because everyday people were willing to die. They hated it. And yet we're made to constantly feel guilty for the bad decisions of people generations ago. How long do we have to feel guilty for until you're satisfied? Is the Islamic faith made to feel guilty because of the horrors caused by the Islamic slave trade? We didn't start slavery, but we ended it on a global scale. Britain has been the most welcoming and the most accepting of other races, but yet we're made to feel so guilty. And the media puts out this false narrative that anyone who criticises the black community, the Muslim community, or immigration are a bunch of racists. Black Lives Matter UK, how dare you?